One of the most popular videos on the channel is all about animal-human anatomy and how you would combine the two. It's been around 2 years since that video was released. Hate that. So we thought it would be a fun idea to reply to some of the comments of that video as a follow-up to any questions that weren't answered. It'll also be great to have a video like this where I actually went to university and took a scientific anatomy class. If you haven't already, check out the original 3 videos about general animal-human characters, animal legs on humans, and animal tails on people, link in the description. So the first question here was from, I love this username, from Kitchen Appliance 1613. What would you say about drawing fish people? I love D&D and OC making in general, so how would you go about it? From a D&D perspective, merfolk, tritons, etc. Not typically mermaids, as they tend to have a half-fish body. 2 ways are the main things that come to mind. The first thing that comes to mind for me is comparing the anatomy of a fish to a person, right? So work with the bones and the organs to see where things might align. For example, the things that we use for movement on a person versus a fish, right? We have our legs, we have our arms, right? Help us move and grab and whatnot. With fish, the things that help them move are their fins, right? Their fins and their tail and their dorsal fin, stuff like that, right? So based on how a fish is designed, quote unquote, a lot of like a fish's anatomy and how they are built kind of all goes backwards like this for the aerodynamics of them being able to be pushed through the water, right? So if we were to apply that to a person, they're probably going to be swimming this way. If we want them to be more fish-like, they might keep their arms at their sides and then use exclusively their feet. They're moving forwards like this. So that means that the whole body needs to have that same aerodynamism. So maybe we want like fins on the arms that go downwards like this. Very similar to the spines on the back here, the bones that go on a fish's like fins. Maybe we want like webbed feet, webbing between the hands as well. And that those will also act as fins, quote unquote, that help us propel through, right? So that's one way to think about it. We could also have like gills, maybe around the neck or the sides of the body to interact with the lungs, whether we want that on the sides of the neck, where then that oxygen will flow down to the lungs, or if we want them to interact directly with the lungs, we can have gills on the sides of the chest as well. That's up to you, that kind of thing, right? So that's one way to think about it. The other way is to keep it to pure fantasy. The secret is that creative liberties should always be taken, especially when we are designing something, right? So we want to make it interesting at the end of the day. So things that I personally do, right, is like I really like webbed ears. I also like fins as ears. I have a character, their name is Rye. They're based on a flashlight fish. They were really inspired by Splatoon because I wanted their whole thing to be like they're a street artist. So rather than work with, you know, like normal ears or whatever, I gave them just like fins for ears, and I thought that was really cute. But no, they are purely aesthetic. So either you want to go like really like scientific with it, or you can be really like aesthetic with it. You can be both, honestly. You could do either or, but that's kind of up to you. If you're looking for a platform to post commissions or find artists to bring your new ideas to life, ArtDen is the perfect place. Whether you're new to commissioning or a seasoned pro, ArtDen makes it easy to connect, manage orders, and securely accept payments all in one place. Download the app today and start creating with artists. Second one here is by Dystopian. Oh, dystopian with 2 1s instead of I's. What about reptilian features? I always see mammalian features and never see any other type of animal. It's true. I like working with reptiles personally. I think it's a lot of fun. But this is, again, really similar to the fish. You want to compare reptile bone and muscle structure with a person. So I'm going to grab a crocodile because that's like a more complicated one. So, want to compare the bones and whatnot. A reptile works in a really sideways way. Lots of pelvic and shoulder anatomy is pushed outwards by comparison to ours, right? We technically have a very similar bone structure going on if we really break it down, compare the two. Right, we have our femur, tibia, fibula, and then we have our tarsals, metatarsos, our phalanges. Similar structure, however, if we look at it from above, right, we notice that the pelvic structure right here is a lot flatter than ours. Right, with us, we have our femurs coming out from almost the bottom of the pelvis. This one is coming out more from the side, and it's almost as if he's constantly squatting. One of my favorite like things that I've seen ever is like somebody who had drawn out like how animal anatomy would look like on a person, And it was how they explained like legs and like turtle shells and stuff like that, right? It's the part of the body that is changing. So in this case, I'm gonna do that with this person. We have our arms, and then it's like the legs are doing like this magic constantly and forever, right? So it's kind of like we've got everything super spread out and like really wide. So this is how a lot of reptiles and amphibians work. It's really, really up to you how much of this you want to incorporate into the person. But yeah, I tend to work off of exclusively the pelvic anatomy of reptile if they're meant to be more humanoid. If I want more reptile, I essentially only work with the bipedal nature of the humanoid label, quote unquote, and keep the rest of the anatomy the same for the animals. So my partner has a character. So Na was very like, he was supposed to be a lizard folk. My partner wanted him to be based off of a crocodile. So I essentially just made this crocodile stand up. I kept the more forwards yet sideways. I pushed these forwards a little bit, the arms, so he could still like work with those. But I kept that sideways nature of the pelvis here, where the leg would sort of be coming out from the side rather than from underneath. Same thing with up here. We have the rib cage, really, really sideways look of the body. And that's like, this is like a super, super reptile, right? Kind of biped. There's a couple ways you can do them if you want like a tail. Look again at this bone structure. It is just an extension of the spine, very similar to the rest. But by comparison, not only is it an extension of the spine, but like the muscle and fat and meat like also just extend. It's like one big tube on the body. So if I wanted them to be way more humanoid, what you could do is like almost like a mermaid, continue that like really meaty pelvic structure and have like the legs to the side. Or you can continue the spine, but like rather than continuing all of the meat, it's like you could have it more like a cat, where it's like instead of going through the whole body, it almost like attaches to the spine through here. Again, it is really, really up to you, but there's a couple of solutions that I might do if you wanted something more reptilic. I like reptiles. I like working with them a lot. The problem solving is a little bit easier than a fish person, in my opinion. Videos like these wouldn't be possible without our awesome patrons and YouTube members who help our mission of making arts education free and accessible for everyone. Become a member today and unlock cool perks like exclusive chats with our creators, access to class recordings, and critiques from instructors. This one comes from Pocket Dog 5006. How will bird tails that are small, and fish ones work? I was wondering that throughout the whole video. Does it work the same way as the other two examples, or is there a different method for drawing them? I'm gonna break these all up into different ones. Right, so small tails just mean a smaller spinal extension, essentially. Right, if you look at a bird, and let's compare it to a cat. If we look at the difference in the tailbones, right? If you look at the bird, right, we notice how short these tailbones are, right? This just little nubby bit by comparison to a cat, right? Look at how much longer this cat tail is, right? A bird's like tail only looks long because you have feathers attached, right? So think of it like a hair. Just because you have really long hair doesn't mean you have a super long skull, right? So small tails just mean a smaller spinal extension, essentially. So if you had a person who had a bird tail, so all that we are adding on afterwards is just feathers. This is where a tail is coming out of. You know, it doesn't really matter with a bird tail, I guess, because you're gonna cover it up with feathers. So it'll appear a lot longer, but that little like spinal extension is actually very, very small, right? Because feathers are not bone. So again, think of it like hair. Just because you have long hair doesn't mean you have a long skull. Fish tails are tricky because fish are tricky. The tail is just part of the skeleton, right? Fish don't really have pelvis. They don't really have like shoulder girdles or scapula or anything like that, right? Definitely not a pelvis. So this is kind of just an extension of the spine. So most people treat it as if it's like a second spinal attachment, essentially add a whole fish to the back of the person. So like the way that I've seen it, and I actually really like this, is like, this is kind of one of those like more unrealistic tails that I actually really like the look of. If we have like a person, let's say it's a shark, they have like a whole other just like attachment back here, and I'd like bonus points if they add like a dorsal fin and like other fins and whatnot to it, and then they just add the fishtail like that, right? That's what I see most people do. It's very similar to like how you would treat like a reptilian kind of character. But if we wanted to make it like super realistic, technically what you would do is you would just have the person like this. You would do this, and then the tail would be like that, essentially, right? Because you have the spine, and this is kind of just an attachment of the spine back here. So that's all you would do if you wanted like a really, really realistic kind of fishtail, which I think this is kind of cute too, but it's like, if you want the person to sit down, this isn't gonna work, right? So I think it's kind of cute in concept, but like in terms of functionality, it's another thing you want to think of when it comes to like design. But you know, either or, again, at the end of the day, it's all fantasy, so really these are all just explanations based on how I think it would work or how a lot of other people think it would work, right? But the anatomy will always be a little wonky since it's not real. You know, this isn't how it was actually built, so no matter what you try and do, the anatomy will always kind of be just shoved around and pushed around to the best of our ability. This next question is by someone who is not important, 7347, not true, you're always important. You mentioned bear ears, and I've always struggled to make a more quote-unquote accurate version of it, just to do an aesthetic version. Do you or anyone have any tips? Thank you. Bears, how I might approach them is similar to like how I mentioned how you would do cat ears. The two ways that I might approach it, you could either do this magic, right, which is like move them to the sides of the face, they're kind of Ewok-esque. a bit like those guys. The little tuft, I guess, is what's reminding me. They do kind of look like little teddy bears, Ewoks. But you can move them down to the sides of the face. This looks a little strange to me. Or you could do like what I recommend with cat ears. It's like you kind of put them up here and then maybe bring them down a little so they're a little bit larger. So it kind of still looks like it's coming from the sides, but like it brings it down all the way down to the ear canal. And this is the last comment we have here. This one is by Lil Fox 0585. I understand where the tail should come from, but how would poofy tails look like a fox? My poofy tails look like weird fuzzy oval. So this depends on how you want the fur to be weighted. It actually works really similarly to how hair works, right? Coily hair will sit different than straight hair. So if we compare it to like a person who has like really coily poofy hair, that hair is going to, you know, puff up. This hair has a lot of volume to it. By comparison to somebody with straight hair, somebody with hair more like mine, that hair is going to sort of lay flatter on the head and flow around the head by comparison to somebody with really, really coily hair. And the same thing goes for fur, right? Fur is by nature just a little more like fine than hair is, and it has a little bit less weight, just because fur doesn't tend to grow as long as a person's hair does. But with a fox, right, you have fine, short hair that can stand on end, so a quote-unquote poofy oval actually just works fine. Let's look it up. Foxtail. If you wanted that poofy oval, that's technically correct, because you've got a lot of fine hair that kind of does just poof out. So if you wanted that poofy sort of fur look, this works just fine. If the hair was longer like a horse's, it would have more weight and hang. If the hair was curly, it might also kind of be a poofy oval, right? You just need to consider the texture of the fur itself, right? You need to consider the texture of what it is that you are hoping to illustrate. This video is part of a series where we address some of your biggest questions about fantasy and anthro character creation. Be on the lookout for part 2, where we talk more in depth about fantasy anatomy. Join a virtual class in seconds and learn live from professional artists. Enjoy weekly assignments, individual guidance, and real-time feedback on your artwork so you can create like a fearless illustrator. If you learned something new, please like and share this with a fellow art nerd. If you love receiving quality and free arts education, subscribe. Here's a couple other videos you can check out next.